This is All Clear Firefighter Wellness, where we help you light your fire within. Welcome to All Clear Firefighter Wellness. I'm your host, Travis, and we are the podcast where we cover the issues and challenges that we see in the world of firefighting today. I'm your host, Travis. As I mentioned before, we're going to dive into an issue that is real close to home today, and that is PFAS, or PFAS, depending where you're from. Now, PFAS are forever chemicals that have become a huge topic in the firefighting community for their potential health risk and their presence in a lot of firefighting gear and in certain types of firefighting foam. Now, today we'll talk about what PFAS are, how they show up in our line of work, and more importantly, what firefighters need to know to protect themselves. Let's get a little history first. Now, PFAS, or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, it's a mouthful, are a class of about 4,700 different synthetic chemicals that are designed to withstand extreme conditions. Now, they were originally created in the 1940s around World War II. Now, PFAS became highly valued in industries, mainly for their ability to repel water, resist heat, and reduce friction. So, as a result, where have we seen them? Well, we've seen them in things like nonstick cookware, waterproof clothing, stain resistant carpeting, and of course, firefighting foams and firefighter gear. Now, the unique thing about PFAS comes from the powerful bond between carbon and fluorine atoms. Now, that is one of the strongest bonds in chemistry, if you remember back to your days of hazmat. This bond is what makes PFAS so effective in resisting degradation, but it also makes it very persistent. In fact, some PFAS can take hundreds, even thousands of years to break down in nature, earning them the name forever chemicals. Now, the stability of this product means that once they're in our bodies or in the environment, they stay there for a very long time. Now, there are some health risks that are associated with PFAS. The persistence of this chemical is particularly concerning because studies have shown that even low level exposure can lead to a buildup in the body, but it's a buildup over time. Over time, these accumulated levels can increase the risk of severe health conditions. Research has linked PFAS exposure to various cancers, including kidney, testicular cancer, as well as liver damage, high cholesterol, fertility issues, and impacts on the immune system. All things that we really don't want to deal with. But it's also been shown that children and pregnant women may be especially vulnerable, especially as PFAS exposure has been associated with developmental effects in children and with pregnancy complications. Now, aside from what it can do to our health, it also has an environmental concern as well. PFAS are also a significant concern, especially when products containing PFAS end up in landfills or when PFAS are released during industrial processes. When that happens, they can leach into the soil and the groundwater, affecting the drinking water supplies and the soil around us. Here in the US, it's estimated that nearly 200 million people have PFAS in their drinking water, above the levels that are recommended by the EPA. So, with all that in mind, what does that really mean for us as firefighters? Well, as we go through this episode, we're going to uncover how PFAS are involved in firefighting tools. We'll see how they impact gear, and more importantly, what we can do to reduce our exposure. So, let's dive into that. Now, you might be wondering, what does this have to do with firefighting? What the heck is PFAS doing in our environment? Well, PFAS are a critical issue in our profession because these chemicals have been widely used for many years in certain firefighting foams known as aqueous film forming foams, or AFFF. You've probably heard that more commonly. Now, these foams are especially formulated to help quickly extinguish fuel-based fires by forming a blanket that smothers the flames and prevents reignition. That's what makes AFFF extremely useful in high-risk fire situations, especially things that have high fuel loads like airports, certain chemical plants, and industrial sites. In those settings, AFFF is the often and most common go to firefighting tool due to its effectiveness. But this same foam contains PFAS, which means each use can lead to significant exposure to these harmful chemicals. And we don't want that. We don't need that. However, AFFF is only part of the PFAS problem for firefighters. Recent research has found that PFAS are embedded in the turnout gear that we rely on daily. Turnout gear is the clothing that shields us from extreme heat, flames, and the toxic substances on the fire scene. Things we know that are really bad for us. Unfortunately, though, studies also indicate that turnout gear, particularly older or gear that's heavily used, is treated with PFAS to make it more water resistant and flame resistant. In a 2020 study, it was found evidently that turnout gear that can contain PFAS in the fabric and coatings used to make the gear durable and resistant can become an environmental hazard. So PFAS are not just in the foam that we may occasionally get around, but is present in the very gear that's supposed to protect us. Now, one of the troubling aspects of PFAS, as we mentioned in turnout gear, is that these chemicals can migrate from the surface of the gear over time. Now, we mentioned older turnout gear or worn gear. Well, as it's worn down through repeated use, washing, exposure to heat, and different things, the PFAS that is meant to protect the fabric can slowly degrade or break away from the surface. And when this happens, it can cause the chemicals to spread in small particulates or dust, which can come in contact with our skin, especially when we're donning or doffing our gear. It's important that we be aware of that and keep that in mind. Studies suggest that firefighters can be exposed to PFAS from their turnout gear in two main ways: direct skin contact or by inhaling the particles that are detached from the fabric. And we know that skin exposure and inhalation are two of the biggest methods that our bodies take in different chemicals, especially carcinogens. Now, this exposure isn't just limited to firefighters wearing gear on the job. Firefighters can be exposed to PFAS in the firehouse or even during routine inspections of their turnout gear. When we're not out fighting fires, we often handle and check our gear. It's what we do. However, unknowingly, we're coming in contact with these chemicals that may rub off on our hands or, as we mentioned with older gear, could become airborne. This cumulative exposure is concerning because PFAS are forever chemicals. Like we talked about, they remain in the body and in the environment for a very long time, basically indefinitely, meaning that small repeated exposures will add up and accumulate over time. Now, one recent study from 2021 looked at PFAS contamination, specifically PFAS and used in older turnout gear. Researchers found that PFAS levels were notably higher in the older gear compared to the new gear. And this suggesting that wear and tear on older gear might increase the risk of PFAS release. This finding indicates that the protective coatings applied to turnout gear may degrade over time. This could lead to higher exposure risk for firefighters who regularly use older gear. Think about a department that maybe doesn't have the budget or have the ability to really afford new gear on a regular basis. Well, as it gets older or it's highly used, then it could potentially be more problematic. Now, that study also emphasizes that even trace amounts of PFAS exposure are concerning, given that these chemicals will build up in the body over years. And since PFAS are associated with serious health risk, including cancer, liver and kidney damage, and even endocrine disruption, firefighters face unique and compounded risk because of this. Now, as many of us know, firefighters already face elevated health risk compared to the general population. We all know that. It's part of what we do. Studies have shown that firefighters are at a higher risk for various types of cancer, respiratory issues, cardiac issues, And a lot of these health conditions are linked to chemical exposure. Adding PFAS to the mix is a significant concern, especially as research suggests that PFAS exposure is linked to increased risk for certain cancers, particularly those affecting the kidneys, testicles, and liver. Now, for firefighters who are already predisposed to these risks due to smoke inhalation, heat stress, and exposure to other chemicals, PFAS exposure in turnout gear and firefighting foams may intensify the risk. But notice the word may intensify the risk. Now, there are also concerns that PFAS exposure can affect reproductive health and immune system and function. Now, for younger firefighters, especially those who may spend decades in this profession, early and continuous exposure to these chemicals could pose long-term health challenges. For example, PFAS exposure has been shown to reduce immune function, which could lead to increased susceptibility to illness and longer recovery times. Now, it's crucial for firefighters to have good health, and fast recovery time is essential too for optimal performance. And we don't want these things compromising our safety. Now, while we know PFAS are present in firefighting gear and AFFF foam, the specific level of exposure and how they accumulate in the firefighters' bodies and the full extent of the health impacts are still under investigation. Researchers are working very hard to measure exactly how much PFAS exposure comes from the gear versus other sources such as firefighting foams, uh, the contaminated environments you live in, or it could even go to the Gore-Tex clothing you wear while you're hunting. Our exposures are not just at work or in the fire service, but it can come from where we live, it can come from what we wear. So it really is unfair to say it's just gear, it's just AFFF foam. We have to look at it as a holistic situation. Now, one area being studied for how heat and sweat impact PFAS exposure has come around as well. Scientists are beginning to hypothesize that at high temperatures, um, PFAS may more easily transfer from our gear and into our skin. Now, we know that's the truth with a lot of other carcinogens, but while we're sweating, we could further facilitate absorption. We know this is true, like we mentioned, for the carcinogens such as soot. So it looks that this is a similar type of situation. Although these studies are ongoing, preliminary findings underscore the fact that PFAS in turnout gear may be significant and overlooked as a source of exposure. Until we know more, though, it's essential for firefighters to be aware of the risk and advocate for safer alternatives and decontamination procedures. Now, the firefighting community as a whole has started to respond to these concerns. Some fire departments are moving away from PFAS foams and are switching to PFAS free, I think they call them green foams, a lot of different terms for it, that are alternatives. But being an alternative, we don't know how effective they are. So, additionally, there is a growing call for manufacturers to develop PFAS free gear. Now, that's another challenge. We need things that still meet safety standards. But in the meantime, until we have something that works, decontaminating gear thoroughly, storing it away from living areas, and minimizing contact with AFFF foam are some of the most practical steps that we can take to reduce our exposures. Now, by being proactive and informed, we can push for safer practices and products that better protect firefighters from the hidden hazards of PFAS. Now, this issue is complex, but it's one that we must face together for the long term health and safety of our community as firefighters and first responders. Now, what are some of the health impacts of PFAS on firefighters? Well, we already know that we have the higher than average risk for cancer and other health issues because of what we do and what we're exposed to. The toxic load that firefighters carry as a result of our exposures place us in a high risk category. Now, with studies showing that an increased likelihood of developing cancers such as respiratory, digestive, and urinary tract cancers, as well as heart disease and respiratory issues, can be linked back to PFAS. But when you start looking at how PFAS exposure affects us, and not in addition to these things, the health challenges that we're facing are becoming more and more concerning, and they're just stacking up like cards. We have to pay attention to what's happening. One of the most significant, I can't talk today, health risk that is linked to PFAS is the increased risk of cancer. We've said that multiple times today. And, as being part of the North Carolina Firefighter Cancer Alliance, it's something that we pay very close attention to. And we talk to a lot of really smart people that are aware of how PFAS is affecting us, and they're working toward finding ways to slow it down. Now, while PFAS has been associated with multiple health issues, cancer is the one that is the most severe. PFAS chemicals are known to disrupt the endocrine system. You know, Basically, it'll interfere with our DNA, and it can cause oxidative stress. Basically, what that means is your cells are damaged. All of this contributes to the development of cancer over time. It's not an immediate thing, it's over time. It's like one cigarette may not give you lung cancer, but if you do it for a long period of time or for a lifetime, we know what the outcomes are.
We'll return after these messages.
Are you enjoying this podcast? If so, we have a small favor to ask. Subscribing and donating helps us to keep the show running and brings you even more great content. By subscribing, you'll never miss an episode. You'll be able to support what you love. Donations, no matter how small, can help us cover production costs, improve the quality of each episode, and generally keep the lights on. So hit that subscribe button, and if you can, consider making a donation. Visit us at allclearpodcast.com to donate and catch up on past episodes and even read our blog. Thanks for listening and supporting our show. For firefighters who have already faced elevated cancer risk due to smoke, chemical exposures, maybe even as your genetics, adding PFAS further exacerbates the problem. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, I always have a problem pronouncing their names, has actually classified some PFAS compounds as possible human carcinogens. Now, that ranks up there with things like soot, benzene, different things that we know really have a negative impact on our health. And with the studies pointing to the elevated risk of kidney, testicular, and prostate cancer, as well as thyroid and liver issues, firefighters exposed to these chemicals are really facing a huge challenge. Now, in a notable study that was conducted in 2020, researchers followed about 1,000 firefighters in Southern California, and they found out that those with higher levels of PFAS in their blood were at a significantly greater risk of developing cancer. Now, the study highlighted that the cumulative effect of PFAS exposure, suggesting that firefighters with prolonged or repeated contact with PFAS gear, foam, or environments may experience higher blood concentrations of these chemicals over time. Now, while the exact mechanism linking PFAS and cancer is still under investigation, the findings underscore a clear correlation between PFAS exposure and cancer incidence in firefighters. This reinforces the need for caution, but more importantly, further research. Firefighters already encounter numerous carcinogenic and toxic compounds and substances on our job. From benzene and smoke to asbestos in some of the older buildings. When we look at how furniture is made now, everything's a hazmat scene. Each fire scene can expose firefighters to a unique mix of hazardous chemicals, many of which will accumulate in our bodies over time, and that heightens our risk for cancer. Now, PFAS adds that extra layer, like we talked about, to this already hazardous chemical profile, as they are known to accumulate or bioaccumulate, fancy word, in the body over time without breaking down. This means that a firefighter who regularly uses PFAS containing foams or wears gear that's treated with PFAS may gradually build up a significant amount in their bloodstream, raising the overall risk of developing cancer, along with other diseases that are associated with these chemicals. Now, The relationship between PFAS and organ specific cancers is an area that's really being intensely researched right now. Kidneys, liver, prostate, and thyroid glands are particularly vulnerable when exposed to PFAS. For instance, the kidneys play a central role in filtering toxins out of our body. We know that out of our blood system. But, you know, if it does it over a long period of time, it can lead to things such as renal cell carcinoma. Testicular cancer also has been linked to PFAS exposure, with studies suggesting that these chemicals can disrupt hormone regulation, leading to abnormal cell growth in the testes. The liver, yet another organ that frequently is affected by PFAS, as these chemicals cause the liver to enlarge, they alter the liver enzymes and lead to liver cancer over time due to chronic exposure. It's amazing how the organs in our body that do the most filtration are the ones that are affected the most by this stuff. You know, Another one is the thyroid. We know that's an organ that's critical for our metabolic regulation. It's also highly sensitive to that PFAS exposure again. PFAS are known to disrupt the endocrine system, meaning that they interfere with hormone production and regulation. Disruptions in thyroid hormones can lead to a cascade of health issues. Anything from thyroid cancer to issues with our dietary system. There's a ton of problems that can just come from that one gland alone. But for firefighters, this endocrine disruption can make the physical impacts and mental stress of the job even worse. It can lead to things such as chronic fatigue, other metabolic issues, as well as an increased likelihood of thyroid cancer over time. Additional health concerns beyond cancer come up as well. While cancer is one of the most severe outcomes linked to PFAS, these chemicals are also associated with other chronic health issues that can impair a firefighter's ability to perform his job. For example, exposure to PFAS has been shown to impact liver function and cholesterol levels and immune health. Studies indicate that individuals with elevated PFAS levels can often have higher cholesterol, which can lead to cardiovascular disease, something else that we know kills firefighters very, very easily. For firefighters whose cardiovascular systems are under extreme stress during physical exertion, we know this could actually mean for us a higher risk of heart disease and related health complications. Yet another layer of occupational risk affiliated with these different chemicals. You know, Moreover, PFAS exposure is linked to immunosuppression, which can also decrease the body's ability to fight off infections. Immunosuppressive effects of PFAS could result in more frequent illnesses or prolonged recovery times for firefighters who are often exposed to pathogens and environmental toxins on the job. Think about when you run EMS calls, things like that. Maybe you're in a, exposed to someone that has, some type of virus such as COVID or even the flu. It can really wear you down if you have an immune system that's compromised. The combination of physical, chemical, and biological hazards make immune health critical for us as firefighters, further emphasizing the need to reduce the unnecessary exposures wherever we can. But what can we do to mitigate these exposures? Well, given the growing body of evidence that are linking PFAS to cancer and other serious health concerns, fire departments and policymakers are starting to consider alternative practices to limit PFAS exposure among firefighters. Now, this isn't saying this is what you need to do at your department. All Clear is not telling you to do these things, but have an open conversation with your training division, with your administrative level officers, so that you can discuss openly what are some ways you might be able to address it. One strategy involves transitioning away from PFAS foams such as AFFF to PFAS free alternatives. We talked about the green foams earlier. Although these foams are still being developed and studied for their effectiveness, They give some hope and some effectiveness in reducing exposures as one of the primary sources for PFAS in the firefighting industry. In terms of gear, some manufacturers are exploring PFAS free options. Although the challenge to produce gear that provides the same level of heat and flame resistance without using the chemicals is a problem. We know that there are PFAS free gears out there now, but they don't have the same resistance to certain oils, flammable liquids, and the way they have to be maintained and cleaned is very different. These are all things that have to be looked at. Fire departments are also implementing improved decontamination practices, like we mentioned, to reduce the buildup on the gear. And also, they encourage firefighters to handle and store the gear in ways that minimize skin contact and inhalation particles. Now, firefighter advocacy groups have also been very vocal in pushing for transparency regarding PFAS content in gear and foams, as well as greater research into the safer materials. Organizations like the IAFF have supported efforts to raise awareness for PFAS and risk to, PFAS risk. And they also promote industry standards to help put firefighter health and safety over, the gear itself. As research continues to eliminate the dangers of PFAS exposure, firefighters are becoming increasingly aware of the health risks that are posed by these chemicals. The stakes are high, and we face a compounded risk for cancer and other chronic conditions due to our jobs. Plain and simple. Reducing PFAS exposure is a critical step in safeguarding our health, and it will require continued advocacy, research, and industry innovation to find safer alternatives. However, in the meantime, we should stay informed. We should ask for safer products and adopt practices that minimize unnecessary exposure to those harmful chemicals. Now, one of the things that a lot of people talk about is staying away from PFAS. Don't put your gear on until you need it. Well, there is something to be said for that. But at the same time, don't forget we need to train in the gear that we work in. So likewise, there may be some exposures that we can't avoid, but we just have to be smart about how we're addressing it. The dangers posed by PFAS remind us that the fight for safety doesn't end when a fire is out. We have to keep working at it. As a community, we have to work together to address these hidden hazards, ensuring the well-being of firefighters today, and more importantly, for the generations to come. It may be too late for people that have been in the industry like me or even possibly you, but the rookie class is starting tomorrow. They have time to learn. Now, if you're here in North Carolina and would like to participate in one of the most important studies looking at PFAS among firefighters, we ask you to please consider joining the North Carolina Firefighter Cancer Cohort Study. Now, this is a joint effort between Duke University and NC State, looking at all the aspects of PFAS in our world as first responders. It looks at everything from the health impacts to the different types of gear and what may be able to be done to reduce exposures and have better alternatives in the future. I myself and another board member of the North Carolina Firefighter Cancer Alliance have already gotten enrolled. We've given our samples and we're on the list of firefighters that will be followed in this long-term study. We ask that you also please consider joining up if possible and help address the issue that is affecting our industry. Now, more information about the cohort study will be in the show notes and on our website at allclearpodcast.com. As we always say here on All Clear, we encourage you to light your fire within. But let's take it one step further. Not only light your fire within, but be safe while you're doing it. You have been listening to All Clear Firefighter Wellness. All Clear is presented by the North Carolina Firefighter Cancer Alliance. You can find out more about us at allclearpodcast.com. Leave us a message. We'd love to hear from you. If you like what you hear, tell someone. All opinions expressed on the podcast do not always reflect the opinions of the podcast. As always, light your fire within. Do you have an idea that you can't quite get out of your head and onto paper? Does your department need updated shirts? If so, you need to talk to the guys over at Studio Print Shop. We've been working with the guys at Studio on making some of our ideas become reality. Whether you need screen printing, embroidery, or graphic design, they have you covered. They're even working with the latest direct-to-garment printing technology to make your ideas come true. Check out their link on our website or go to studioprintshop.com and get 10% off your first order when you use the discount code All Clear. Studio Print Shop, creativity fueled by passion and vision.